Hi, this short video is going to be about writing melodic lines. So you may be somebody who's taking a theory exam, like some of the high grade theory exams where you're given an opening idea and you have to develop it into a melody of a certain length. It's possibly even more likely that you're a composer, and it doesn't matter which style you're working in, but a composer's frustration is often that you've got some kind of melodic musical idea, some kind of snippet that you want to use, but you're not quite sure how to let it evolve and develop. So that's what we're going to be talking about here. So let's imagine for a moment that you were given the first bar of this melody, and either you were given it or that you've thought of it and thought, hey, that's a great musical idea. So I think, yeah, I can imagine that being played on a trumpet or something. And what am I going to do with it? How am I going to develop this into something that's a little bit longer? One thing that can happen, you see, is that you have an idea and you think, well, that's a cracking idea for the first bar. What am I going to do in the second bar? So then you come up with another idea. And then you think, well, what shall I do next? So then you come up with a third idea. And you end up, if you're not careful, with a very kind of disjointed piece of music because you've just got a whole sort of collage of ideas that are somehow being stitched together. And one thing we've got to think about is how we develop ideas that we're given, and also how do we contrast those ideas. So this is what I'm trying to demonstrate here. And what I'm trying to demonstrate is how you could take this first one bar idea and develop it into a 4-bar phrase, another set of 4 bars, another set of 4 bars, until we end up with 12 bars of music. How do you get from 1 bar to 12 bars? Because if you can do that, you can probably expand this notion into a bigger scale. And what I'm trying to do here is to demonstrate how you might work quite comprehensively with the idea of the first bar, how you would develop it, how you would work it. And when comes the point at which you can not develop that anymore, and therefore you need something contrasting. So I've introduced a little contrasting idea and hope to show you how that might work. Okay, now the way you write it is going to vary hugely in terms of what style you're writing in, but the approach might well be the same. So let's have a look at the given first bar. And what do we notice about that? We notice we've got this repeated note. We've got a very distinctive dotted rhythm there as we move up the scale to F sharp and come back to D. So the first bar really affirms the D major tonality, and the character comes mainly through that dotted rhythm. Now there's no tempo mark, so there's no reason why you can't take the same idea and say, well, actually, that's all very well, but I might perceive it rather slower. It would have a different kind of musical character then, wouldn't it? That's absolutely fine. But the point is, how am I going to develop it? Well, I've done something very straightforward in the second bar on purpose. And what I've done in the second bar is to say, well, there's the idea that we were presented with. Let's now use it in sequence. So I've just taken it up a note. So the first 2 bars. So you can hear how that second bar builds on the first bar simply by repeating the material up a note. Doesn't have to be up a note, could be up 3 notes, could be down 5 notes. But the idea of repetition at a different pitch, which is done through sequence. If you're writing something that is basically using a tonal language, you might want to think a little bit about what the implications are for harmony as well. Because it seems to me that the first bar is all suggesting a chord 1 in D major, D, F sharp, A. A chord of D. The second bar then suggests a chord 5 or a chord of A. I mean, you can do something much more fancy than that if you want to, but that's the basic kind of harmonic hint of it. So going from a tonic chord to a dominant chord, a D chord to an A chord would be quite a strong start. Because when we write melody, if we're writing in any kind of conventional musical language, we need to think, it's all very well to write this in the melody, but does the harmony, do the chords make sense to go with it? Now, what I've done then is to say, well, I wonder how far we can stretch this idea of sequence. So I've started the third bar as a sequence. So have a listen to this. Now, I may have just taken it to the extreme there, because if I were to have the last note of that bar in the same pattern, I think we'd start to think this is getting a bit predictable. If I did this. Then carry on. We're fed up with it now, aren't we? Because we know what's coming, we've worked out the pattern. So just at the point where you think this is starting to get predictable, that could be the moment to change things. So you'll notice I've very slightly changed the end of this bar, not by very much actually, because if I was maintaining the sequence, I'd go A, F sharp, and all I've done is slipped a G in the middle there, and I've also used the dotted rhythm again, so that idea sort of doesn't disappear off the radar. And then because we've really milked this idea in the first phrase, I thought let's just slow it down into what would be an implied cadence at the end of the first phrase. Important to think in phrases, because the other thing that can happen if you develop an idea is you end up with this continuous stream of music that never breathes. And the melody might keep going, it doesn't have to stop, but we need to think, where's the musical punctuation, where are the cadences going? So I've tried to build in a really solid cadence at the end of that first phrase. So let's see how the first phrase fits together. Okay, so do you see where that's gone? I've really used the first idea to the point at which it's beginning to be predictable. So I've broken that predictability and then built in a cadence. So the last bar is slightly different in character from the first three bars, and it's kind of pulling us to a halt at the cadence without the whole thing stopping. You don't want a great long 4-beat note in that bar. You want to keep the rhythm moving. But we do feel as if we've come to the end of the first phrase. We're ready to take a musical breath. And also I've kind of organised it so the harmonic implications could actually be very simple. You could start with a chord 1 or a D chord, go to a chord 5 or an A chord, come back to a chord 1 or a D chord, go back to a chord 5 or an A chord. So that all kind of sits comfortably. There are things that you could do that could be more imaginative, a bit more complicated, but that would work. And it also means that we've now arrived at an imperfect cadence. Okay, now then, we need to carry on using the given material in the second phrase, but this is the point at which we're probably going to need to introduce something new. Well, there are two things that I've introduced essentially that are new. One is that you'll notice instead of writing a 4-bar phrase, I've actually written two 2-bar phrases. So we've got not the sense of the long arch of the 4 bars, but 2 plus 2, and then coming back to 4 for the last line. So that gives us a little kind of variety in the design of it. And I've also introduced this triplet figure. It doesn't have to be a triplet, could be something else, but a distinctively different rhythm in this case. Why am I focusing on rhythm? Because the dotted rhythm makes the rhythm very distinctive. So let's maybe do something with the rhythm, because that's one of the really distinctive features of this melody. But we've had this little idea of playing with sequence, and I'm thinking, well, let's do something a bit different, still using some of the ideas, introducing a new idea, but maintaining the idea of sequence. And at the same time, using the sequence to modulate to some other keys. So you might notice that in the first 2 bars of this second line, I've introduced C natural, so that's modulating to G major, the subdominant key. By using it in sequence then, in the second half of the second line, going up a tone, that takes me from G major into A major. A major is the dominant key of D major, so that's a really nice pattern. I've gone to the subdominant key in the first half, then I've gone to the dominant key in the second half by using the sequence, and then the dominant key prepares me for a return to the tonic key on the third line. So that really kind of builds a bit of structural cohesion. Let's have a look at this phrase then. So beginning of the second line. Okay, so what have I done there? I've used the dotted thing, but I've kind of extended its use. So instead of it just being a one-off appearance of the dotted thing, I've put two of them together. And then just here, when you're thinking, well, have we had enough dots? Maybe we have. Here's a triplet. And that feels like a rhythmic contrast entirely, doesn't it? And now I'm taking it up a tone, so we get this sequence back and we get the modulation, and it's also a kind of heightening of the tension. So listen to those two phrases together. So you see how that works? And then we can come back and do the tonic key for the last line. Okay, and just before we leave the middle line, what's the implication for the harmony? Well, probably starting on a D major chord. Then when I introduce that C natural, it turns the D major tonic chord into a 5/7, a dominant seventh in G. So then I could do this. So I'm arriving on a tonic chord in G and treating the C as a little appoggiatura. So that's quite a nice little decoration of that, isn't it? And then I could use a chord of E and then go to a chord of A. So it's 5-1 in A major. Again, that appoggiatura becomes a distinctive thing. And it's another new ingredient at one level. We haven't before had a rhythm that goes crotchet dotted minim, crotchet dotted minim. That slightly displaces the accent as well, because I'm moving on the first beat, the strong beat, and then the next note comes on the second beat, which is a weak beat. So we feel that slight rhythmic jolt. And with the appoggiatura idea in mind, it puts an emphasis on the first note that then relaxes onto the second note to end the phrase. So that's all part of that design. So I've started somewhere by turning the original bar into an opening statement. I've then continued for the next 4 bars by modulating, moving to G major, then to A major, continuing the use of sequence and introducing the triplet figure and just playing with this little appoggiatura thing. And now I'm sort of ready to come back home again, aren't I? That's kind of where it wants to go next. So what have I done on the last line? I've started exactly as I did on the first line. Now, by that point, we're thinking, oh, here we go. We know what this is going to be. We heard it all before. He's going to go. And then probably this again. Yeah, but this is it. You've got to work out, where does that point come where predictability starts to emerge? And I think it's at the end of the second bar. So I've made a slight change at the end of the second bar. So we're not quite expecting that, and it pulls us out of that and pulls us into some further use of the triplets. Now, remember, the triplets were a kind of contrasting new idea on the second line, but I don't really want to have an idea on the first line and then something different on the second line and then something that returns on the third line. It'll be more integrated if I can combine ideas from the first line and the second line. So having kind of reworked the first 2 bars of the original phrase, I'm then thinking, come on, let's get these triplets back in again, but maybe to extend them, to develop them a little bit. So instead of single statements of triplets, I've now got a kind of double statement. So that just develops the idea a bit. You see, it's very small development, but it has an impact. And then I want a nice rousing finish. So there we are at the end, where I'm just using notes of the tonic chord, and having had quite a bit of conjunct movement, sort of scale movement, at the end I'm purposely making it more disjunct. I'm leaping around a bit to make the end feel more distinctive. So the last phrase. Okay, so I'm not claiming this to be the best melody in the world, but I'm just trying to illustrate something about its design. So there you are. I hope that's helpful if you're doing these kind of theory exercises. And I certainly hope it's helpful if you're trying to create your own music, if you're composing or improvising and you've got an idea and you want to develop in some way so that the idea is developed, we have contrasting material, and that the whole thing actually fits together, some sense of structure and cohesion. And that's what I'm just trying to demonstrate with this melody. So let's end with a performance of the whole melody. You could be more fancy with a harmony. We haven't done anything to write in any particular articulation or dynamics or tempo. That's all refinement you can make. So this is all about the design. So I hope that's useful.